good evening, and welcome. Tonight we are going to be going over the history and geography of Norway. This long country up here. Actually slide it over a tiny bit so you can see over here. Norway is up in the very far north of Europe, up in Scandinavia, and in the Nordic area as well. Norway has one very prominent geographical feature, which are the fjords. The fjords line its coast all the way down through here. So, what is a fjord? A fjord is formed when a glacial area, because Norway used to be completely covered in ice during the Ice Age. You have this area full of ice. It starts to melt and water forms in between. You get water there and then these big mountains. So all along the coast here we have the fjords. There's actually a picture in my atlas down here, and we'll flip through this book after I do the history as well. There's a picture of some icy fjords down here. There's a cruise ship going through them. Not the best picture, but there are many, many other pictures in my little book I'm going to show you. There we go. And actually, I'm going to leave this off to the side for a bit because I'm going to flip through this a little bit more. I will show you lots of pictures of beautiful fjords. The biggest fjord in Norway is right here. It's called the Sognefjorden. It's also the deepest fjord as well. There are 1,190 fjords along the coast here, and they're all very beautiful. Norway seas border some very important areas. We have the Barents Sea up here. You can see the Arctic Ocean. This would be the Atlantic Ocean. The Norwegian Sea you can see over here. It actually covers all this area and way farther out past this map. And we have the North Sea down here to its south, which tells you how far north it is because the North Sea is on its southern coast. And then we have this little piece of water here, the Skagerrak, a strait, I suppose, which leads up into Norway's capital city of Oslo right there. The other really big major city in Norway is Bergen, right here on the coast there of the ocean. Norway borders Sweden, as you can see over here. It also shares a border with Finland. There we go. Finland, and it has this tiny little border with Russia up here. Norway, as you can see, also has lots and lots of islands. It has over 50,000 islands. And it has some other interesting little islands around the world. So I'm going to show you in my atlas where they are. Excuse my very squeaky chair. It's really misbehaving tonight. Let's see, I have bookmarked where we need to be. If I can actually turn it. No, okay. Not quite. This bookmark was a fail. At least you get some good book sounds, I suppose. We're almost there. Here we go. So, there's my failed bookmark. Goodbye. We have up here in the Arctic Ocean, so you can see this is the coast of Norway right here under this polar bear. You can see Iceland here, the Barents Sea. Norway has this big island called Svalbard. Svalbard is a very interesting place. It is the northernmost continuously inhabited place. I can see the major city here of Longyearbyen. Very interestingly, they experience this phenomenon for, I think it's like 91 days out of the year. The sun does not set. It stays light for nearly 3 months straight But then they have about 200 days of just darkness where the sun doesn't rise because it's so far north. Norway also has Jan Mayen, which is a very tiny little island. It's uninhabited, and it's actually an active volcano. It's the only active volcano in Norway, which implies that they have other volcanoes that aren't active, which they do. On this map over here, my chair's really pushing it tonight. I know, squeaky chair. There we go. Okay, so here we have Antarctica. First of all, Norway has a part of Antarctica. Antarctica doesn't technically belong to anyone, but there are chunks of it that belong to other countries. So Norway owns this part called Queen Maud Land, or Dronning Maud Land, I suppose. And this very interesting point, being the South Pole, the southernmost point in the world, was first claimed by Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian man, and he planted the Norwegian flag right there in the South Pole. So the non-active volcanic islands they own, first one you can see over here is Peter the First Island, which you actually can't see because it's very small, but it's over here, uninhabited, very icy and barren. And then they have one other island that you can't see on this map because it's very far away from Antarctica. I had another bookmark there, but let's see if this will work. No, okay, this was a bad idea. Let me just find it. Book sounds, am I right? Here we go. Okay, don't use tiny pieces of paper as bookmarks. Lesson learned for that. So here we can see the ocean, and of course you can't really see it because it's very teeny tiny. There we go. It's Bouvet Island. It's considered the most isolated island in the world. As you can see, there's nothing nearby for miles and miles and miles. It's also a volcanic island, and it's also uninhabited. It's just a bunch of seals and birds and ice, basically. So now let me find Norway again. Get you some more book turning sounds. Here we go. There. Turn it back. Now that you've seen the geography of Norway. Right there, looks good. And we'll get this back just to decorate the scenery. There we go. Can't cover up Oslo, of course. Let's see. Another very prominent geographic aspect of Norway are its mountains. The Scandinavian mountains lie all along here. The highest point is actually not on this map. It's actually right next to this mountain. The highest point is called Galdhøpiggen. And first of all, side note, if you're Norwegian or can speak Norwegian, please feel free to correct any of my pronunciation in the comments. It's not the best, I know. The highest peak is like 30 meters taller than this peak, so I'm not sure why that one's there, but maybe it's changed over time. This is kind of an older book. And yeah, the mountains are all up here. The Norwegians love their skiing and winter sports like that, and the mountains are perfect for it. And then we have this region up here in the north. Let me slide it down a bit so you can see. There we go. In English, this area is known as Finnmark. It's more of a plateau area. And it is, you can see here, it's part of Lapland, the farthest northernmost part of Scandinavia. And this is part of the territory of the Sami people, which you can see a Sami man in his traditional attire right there. They're primarily reindeer herders, and their whole livelihoods are based off of herding the reindeer. And let's see, I believe that's all we're going to mention. We'll mention a little bit more throughout its history, and definitely as we flip through this book, I'll show you some other places and things. But that's a basic overview of the geography. Oh, you know what I didn't show you? I just remembered. The largest lake, which surprisingly isn't as large as I thought it would be. I mean, it's still a large lake, but considering all of the water features, I thought it would be a little bit bigger like the ones in Sweden. It is this lake right here. It's known as Musa, and it's right along the longest river, which flows down from the mountains and drains out near Oslo. It is the Glomma River. And that's about it for geography now, I think. Like I said, I'll mention a little bit more throughout the history, so let's get into it. So the earliest humans that would have lived in what is now Norway arrived between the 11th and 10th millennium BCE. They were a hunting, fishing kind of people until a different set of people came. They're known as the corded ware people. And they introduced farming to the area sometime between 3000 and 2500 BCE. Now, there's not a lot known about what comes after this in its early history, mostly due to the fact that they cremated their dead. So there's not much left of these people, but we do know that they traded with the Roman Empire down south. We know some aspects. They had a runic writing. They left a lot of interesting stones with beautiful drawings carved into them, and runes telling their stories on the rocks. And then, of course, we have their mythology that's been passed down and is widely popular. Everyone knows Thor and the other gods, Freya, where we get the word Friday. Thor is how we get Thursday. Then, of course, Odin and Loki and the giants. My favorite author, Neil Gaiman, actually has a really great book called Norse Mythology that just is retelling the mythology stories in his style. I definitely recommend it. But the most famous peoples to come out of Norway in its ancient history by far would be the Vikings, of course. So the Viking Age lasted between the 8th and 10th centuries. Really flourished due to the fact that the Western Roman Empire collapsed and was being overrun by barbarian tribes. So the Vikings were like the upper crust of the barbarian tribes. They were the best at being barbarian, They had magnificent ships, magnificent battle styles. They invaded all around Europe. The Norwegian Vikings most famously traveled this way, and they discovered Iceland in the 9th century. They also traveled to Greenland and were the first Europeans to land on North America. They established a tiny little town in Newfoundland, Canada, which they called Vinland, and I think they only stayed there for like 10 or 20 years before abandoning the site. But yeah, there will be a whole video on Leif Erikson and his adventures coming up. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out. In 872, a Viking leader named Harald Fairhair united most of the Viking tribes together and essentially became the first king of Norway. It was the start of what we know as Norway today. And the Viking Age came to a close for many reasons, but in my opinion, the most prominent reason would have been Christianity. When it arrived in the area, the people really took to it. The first church was built in Norway in 995, and Norwegian churches are something else. There's actually a picture down here. Let me move this again, and let me show you. This is what a typical Norwegian church would have looked like. Completely wooden, with this very distinct roofing so that the snow would slide off of it. They're known as stave churches, and there is not one nail holding all this wood together. They did not use hammers and nails to build their churches. They had a very specific style of holding all the wood together, and the insides are absolutely stunningly built. All sorts of very intricate woodwork. There's a picture in here I'll show you, but so gorgeous. So yeah, Christianity swept through, became the prominent religion. The Catholic Church was the first to really get its foot in the door in Norway. That would change much later when the Protestant Reformation came around. And during these Middle Ages, kind of like I said in my Sweden video, there were like civil wars and strife between kings and what have you. I won't get into detail because even though it's very interesting, it's very detailed, and yeah, we're not going to get into it. But that whole age ended very abruptly in 1349 when the Black Death arrived and wiped out a third of the population. In some cases, entire settlements were wiped out. It was hit pretty hard in this area. So since it was very weakened, a group known as the Hanseatic League stepped in the 14th century. They were a German trading agreement association, I suppose, that would control an entire country through trade. So they swept in and took over. Their center of trade was in Bergen over here. And yeah, they were in charge for quite a while. In 1380, the very young king of Denmark also had rights to the throne in Norway. So they became one entity, kind of cropped out Denmark down there. Important for their history, but I want to be able to see all of Norway. There we go. Sorry, Denmark, I'll get to you someday. And then in 1397, Queen Margaret of Denmark created the Kalmar Union, which was a big union of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark into one country. Yeah, so Sweden ended its agreement to be a part of the Kalmar Union in 1521, and if you want to know why, be sure to check out that video. It was quite dramatic. Norway was tied to Denmark for a very long time, until 1814 actually. Yeah, during that time, Sweden, like I say in my video about Sweden, actually attacked Norway quite a few times, took over a lot of its land, had to cede some of it back after it lost battles with Russia. But there were a lot of typical European advancements going on in Norway at the time in terms of commerce and industry and economic changes of the time, not to mention ways of thinking and political changes, things like that. Then Napoleon comes around, right? So during those wars in 1807, the United Kingdom attacked Denmark in the Battle of Copenhagen, which made the Danes side with Napoleon. And after they lost, very famously, during their treaty to figure out what to do with themselves after the war, Denmark had to give Norway to Sweden. The Norwegian Parliament, which is called the Storting, realized that this was a really good opportunity for independence. So they wrote a constitution and elected a new king, all on May 17th of 1814. This very quickly sparked the Norwegian-Swedish War, and there really were no winners or losers with that war. They just kind of both lost very abruptly. Norway was forced to join Sweden, but Sweden allowed Norway to keep their constitution and, their languages, traditions, their way of life, all of that, which lasted until 1905, when, the best way to describe it in modern terms was that the culture in Norway was more liberal and the culture in Sweden was more conservative. So there's just, even though, culturally they're very similar, they're also not very similar in many, many ways, especially during this time. So there was a committee that was formed in the Storting to establish independence. There was a referendum that voted to separate from Sweden, which Sweden agreed to. The Storting had to pick a king, and they elected King Carl of Denmark, who became Haakon the Seventh, and he's the start of the current royal lineage of Norway. Norway remained neutral during World War One. They had a very large merchant fleet at the time, which they still do today, but they did at the time as well. They supplied England and Germany, but Germany wound up sinking some of their merchant ships in their submarines, so that made Norway very angry toward Germany. So even though they were neutral, they were more on the side of the Allies because of that. They also declared neutrality during World War II, but they were invaded by the Nazi Germans on April 9th, 1940. And they would remain occupied until the end of the war in 1945. The royal family fled to England, and a very large and quite successful, in a way, resistance movement formed that led attacks against the Nazi Germans. In particular, there's a really daring story about how they blew up a heavy water plant, which they were using to try to develop nuclear bombs. Also, their merchant marine fleet helped out the British by sending troops to the mainland of Europe in many different operations. And to this day, there's very close ties between Norway and Great Britain because of all that help that they gave to each other. So, obviously after World War II, that left Norway in quite a state, until in their waters, oil was discovered in 1967. They established a oil production market, I suppose, and sent out its exports, and that alone allowed Norway to pay off all its foreign debts and accumulate like a surplus, which has vastly helped its economy and the people of Norway in many, many ways. And honestly, throughout the rest of its modern history, I was looking through trying to find anything interesting, and it's all like political changes, elections, things like that, which is a good sign in my opinion. If your current news is just boring political transitions of power and new prime ministers elected, blah blah blah, then that means everything's going good. That means your democratic process is working. There was a very tragic terrorist attack on July 22nd, 2011, when a neo-Nazi led two separate attacks against Norwegian citizens. There were over 70 dead, over 300 injured. It was such a tragic event and not very relaxing, so that's about as detailed as I'll get into it. So, on that note, let's look through some pretty pictures of Norway. There's a cute reindeer on the cover of this book. Let's see what we've got. Beautiful snowy town. Isn't that gorgeous? And this. These mountains. Something else. The fjords are so magnificent. Let's see. Playing at home. Look how blonde this kid is. Of course, blonde hair and blue eyes are very typical of Scandinavian people. Political map of Norway and Svalbard Island. And some more very blonde kids out in the fjords. So you can see, how the water goes right in between these huge mountains. They're basically mountain ranges with water in between them. Here's on an oil rig, and here's some kids playing in the deep snow. That's a lovely picture there, going on a little hiking adventure. A geographic map of Norway and Svalbard Island. You can see Goldhoppingen right there. the actual highest point in Norway and all of Scandinavia, I believe. Another beautiful picture of the fjords. A picture talking about the land of the midnight sun when the sun doesn't set. Gorgeous. Here's what I'm talking about. Gorgeous fjord pictures. That's a cruise ship. Like a full-on cruise ship. Against these massive, massive mountains. I think this is the waterfalls in this picture. There are these, I think that looks like them, the Seven Sisters. A very famous group of waterfalls that just flow straight down from the mountains. Here's another interesting point. This is called the Troll's Tongue. All of these little very big cliff drops. Very beautiful places all throughout Norway. All because of melting glaciers during the Ice Age. Snowy, snowy mountains. Very beautiful. And look at this picture. I love this picture too. Look at this bright white reindeer against this backdrop. That's a gorgeous picture. Let's see some more fjords. How you can see the mountains rise straight up out of these waters. So beautiful. Look at the clouds too. Absolutely gorgeous. Here are some city shots. Let's see, this is Bergen. Very beautiful. And this is, I believe it's Stavanger. Stavanger? It's one of those. Do let me know if you know. That city is right here. Stavanger. Very snowy day. Looks like they're going on a trip. And here you can see the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. One of the most beautiful sights that Mother Nature creates. So stunning. A beautiful sunny day on the lake. This is Thor Heyerdahl. So this guy had the idea to create a very ancient style raft boat, and he sailed from South America to the Polynesian islands in this raft that was known as the Kon-Tiki, which a famous movie was made about it. There's a whole Kon-Tiki museum, and he was just known for doing really daring stunts, I guess, quests, adventures. At one point he built an Egyptian barge like the ancient Egyptians would have built and sailed from Africa to South America, things like that. A really famous adventure from Norway. Beautiful wildflowers. This is called fireweed. And I left a note for myself about there's a snake on the next page. So I've known people in my life, one of them being my grandmother, who had such a terrible phobia of snakes they couldn't even look at a picture of them. So I'm always very conscientious about that. So there is a snake coming up. If you're sensitive to pictures of snakes, be warned. I'll just show it and cover it up real quick. But here we go. It's just a little grass snake. Harmless, I believe, right? I think those are the ones that don't really pose a threat to humans. And in my opinion, snakes are really sweet and beautiful, but not everyone thinks that way, and that's okay. Okay, snake is gone. Here we see a gorgeous leatherback turtle, the largest species of turtle. And there we go. Oh, polar bears. All wet and cute. And a humpback whale grabbing a bite to eat. I left another note for myself because there's a picture of a dead whale on the next page, and I know I don't even want to look at that. It talks about the whaling industry that persisted for a long, long time in Norway, but I really don't want to look at a picture of a dead whale, so we don't have to. Here's a salmon going blub, blub, blub. And, oh, this is neat. So this is an eider duck. Let me show you on the map. This island right here, known as Vega. Let me move the book. This island is incredibly sparsely populated. I think it's like less than 100 people live there. But the eider ducks come to this island to lay their eggs, and they go under the houses, and people have built like little nesting places for the ducks. And the ducks lay their eggs under their little houses. And they don't make nests. They release their feathers called down. and sit in their big pile of down and lay their eggs until they hatch. And once they leave, the villagers collect the eiderdown and sell it, and apparently it's extremely valuable. They use it for like pillows and duvets and things like that. I guess it's some of like the best, finest down in the world. And it's just really neat how the people on this very tiny island can live off a natural resource that doesn't harm the animals or anything like that. It's really awesome. So, eider ducks. Here's the national bird, the white-throated dipper. And here's an osprey grabbing some food out of the water. And these are cloudberries. They don't look real. We don't have these in America where I live. They look like really delicious raspberries. I really want to try them someday. And out on this gorgeous looking hike, can you believe? Oh, I want to go on a hike like that. Here's an example of some of the ancient rock carving art. In modern times, they've painted the art red just in case it fades or gets distorted somehow. You can see how it was carved. And you can very clearly see that these are some people on a big Viking-style boat. There's even birds in the sky, probably seagulls. Really awesome rock drawing. When was this? At least 2,500 years ago. So cool. Here's some pottery made by the corded ware people. A very traditional Viking boat, ship I should say. Very traditional looking Vikings coming inshore to invade, and a very typical Viking battle. Here you can see a map of Viking expansion. You can see how they went to Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland over there. And of course parts of Scotland and England, Ireland. There's still a lot of Viking place names in Scotland that have remained. This is Olaf II, who's now Saint Olaf, the patron saint of Norway. Really gorgeous picture, by the way. I guess it shows his life, but anyway, here is a very sad picture from the Black Death. It's like they're bringing out their dead. This is Akershus Fortress, which I've probably said wrong, but it was built in the, I assume, the late 13th century, according to this, to defend Oslo. Here's Queen Margaret I of Denmark, who's quite a character. I've been reading about her in my studies of Sweden and Norway. She reminds me a lot of Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones. I think that tells you all I need to know about her. The map of the Kalmar Union. We have, oh, so I didn't mention this in the history, but during the late 17th, late 18th, 19th centuries, there was a mass migration of Norwegians, particularly to the United States, particularly to the states, I should say, of Minnesota and Wisconsin, areas that were typically like Norway. And today, there are as many Americans of Norwegian descent as there are Norwegians in Norway. What a statistic. Here's a factory. It says it's a cigar factory. Of course, Norway was very heavily involved in the Industrial Revolution, but not as famously as some other countries in Europe. This is Roald Amundsen, the first person to reach the South Pole. And here are the Nazi Germans invading Oslo. Here's a sweet old lady with her very fluffy cat. This picture's here just talking about the high life expectancy in Norway. And here's a memorial for the terrorist attack in 2011. A big lion outside the Norwegian legislature. Here's the flag. So let's read this. Norway's flag consists of a red field with 2 blue bars, one horizontal and one vertical, creating a cross. Both blue bars are outlined in white. The cross sits off center, which is known as the Scandinavian cross. Both Denmark and Sweden also use Scandinavian crosses in their flag designs. The design was created by Frederick Meltzer, a member of Norway's parliament, in 1821 and adopted in May of that year. He chose the colors because they are the colors of the French flag and have come to symbolize liberty. This is King Harald V, the current king of Norway. Here he's looking very fancy with his wife, Queen Sonja. This is Gro Harlem Brundtland, the first female prime minister of Norway. And a big map of Oslo, very pretty. The Oslo skyline and the National Theatre, very European looking building. Picture from the oil rigs, wealth from oil, it says. Here we see a big ship carrying some big, what are those called? Shipping containers, that's what they're called. And some sheepies. This book always seems to have sheepies. A big farm of leeks. Harvesting the leeks. This is a fish farm. Looks like he's feeding them. There's salmon, it says in the caption. Fish are a big part of the Norwegian diet. Map of their resources. You can see all the oil fields out there. Here's the Swedish krone, their currency. This picture is here to talk about their healthcare system and how it's one of the most advanced and just pretty much one of the best in the world. There's a very Norwegian looking man fixing a computer. It's a beautiful day in Oslo. We've got a population map. So as you can see on this chart, pretty much the majority of the population lives in this area in the south. And here's a map of the Sami lands all throughout here in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Let's see what else we have. This is a Somali refugee arriving in Oslo. Norway is very, very accepting of refugees from Africa and the Middle East, particularly in this day and age. Here's another photo of some immigrants. Looks like they're heading out to school. Scooter traffic. This is a sign on the Svalbard Islands. Watch out for snowmobiles. Working hard at school. Here's a picture of the beautiful interiors of these old wooden churches. So intricate, all these designs and the wood and carvings, things like that. It says this church was built in 1240. So beautiful. Some wood carvings from Norway's ancient times. What are they doing? Roasting something. Oh, this is the Norse epic of Siegfried, apparently. And another drawing that depicts some of the animal sacrifice that was part of their ancient traditions. This is Yggdrasil. This is basically a map of the world according to Norse mythology. This is the Tree of Knowledge. This is Olaf II converting the pagans to Christianity. Looks like they smashed one of their statues and he doesn't look too happy about that. This is Nidaros Cathedral. Definitely the most famous church in all of Norway. Very, very gorgeous. When the Catholic Church was basically in charge of all the religious and political goings on in Norway, it was all run out of this church. Here are some Lutherans attending a funeral, it says. And this is a modern day church service. And of course there are many Muslims living in Norway. They're praying. And of course there are Jewish people living in Norway. Here's a rabbi reading from the Torah. And here are some men in their Sami traditional costume being blessed, it looks like, yeah. Another example of ancient rock carving art. You can see some of the rune writing up here, and it's covered up by that caption, but some of the ancient runes, that was their written language. Let's see, an old drawing of Viking stories, apparently. This is Henrik Ibsen, by far the most famous playwright in Norway. This is, I'm not sure how to say his name, Ivar Aasen. So there are two different styles of Norwegian dialect in Norway. One is called bokmål, which is very closely related to Danish. But this guy was like, well, since we're trying to get away from the whole Danish influence, I'm going to invent a new dialect called Nynorsk, which combines a lot of elements from Scandinavian languages and is just a new version of Norwegian. But I think it's only like 15% of the population speaks Nynorsk, and everyone else speaks bokmål. Sigrid Undset, very famous novelist who won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Let's see, a horn made from the horn of a goat. That's really interesting. And the fiddle is a very prominent instrument in Norwegian folk music. This says it's a Norwegian soul and jazz singer, Miss Tati. She looks awesome. And I'm not sure how to say his name, so I just won't, but he's the grandson of Henrik Ibsen, and he became a film director. So this is not a picture of the Nazi occupation. These are actors in costume. They're filming a movie. It looks like a colorized photo from World War II, doesn't it? The prow of a Viking ship. They always had dragons, or this is a snake, it says. They always had big, scary-looking prows. The Scream, one of the most famous paintings in the world, one that everyone knows. So the artist, I believe it's pronounced Edvard Munch. I've always said Edvard Munch, but I mean, dialects around the world, right? But yeah, by far one of the most famous paintings ever. Here is a ski jumper, one of the popular Olympic sports in Norway. Norway wins a lot of medals during the Winter Olympics. Here's Ole Einar Bjorndalen, a biathlon skier. This is Magnus Carlsen, a chess grandmaster. Family day out in the fjords, playing on the sled. Looks like fun. Making dinner. Here we go. Parachute time. Did you guys ever do parachute time when you were little? Like, I remember being a little kid, and it was so exciting when it was parachute day, and I had so much fun. And then I grew up and taught preschool, and I always thought parachute time was so boring, and the games were like not even games, you know. But the kids loved it. They had a blast. They're so excited. And I was just like, okay. Do you remember if you ever did parachute time as a kid? And like how fun it was? It's really lame when you're an adult, apparently. Here is a wedding procession. So this is a tradition in Norway that they have the full procession throughout the town heading into the church to do the wedding. That's really neat. Ooh, Norwegian food is so yummy, especially the desserts and the cookies are so good. But look at this stew, so hearty. Open-faced sandwiches are a staple food in Norway. They usually have cheese or some kind of spread with either meat or vegetables, things like that. There's like a million different combinations. Here we go, the cookies. Crumb cracker. I think it's probably not how you say it at all. Here's some kringle Christmas cookies. So good. I have a friend who's part Norwegian, and she makes Norwegian cookies every year. So delicious. Thanks, Caroline. This is a freeze tag game they play in Norway. They call it Stiff Witch. It's pretty much freeze tag. Sounds fun. And enjoying a nice day out at the cafe. And that's the end of the book. So, Look at all these fish hanging out to dry. Wow. Alrighty, so that's the end of our video for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good